I'm going to give a talk based on a workshop that my colleagues listed as co-authors and I held. We were trying to think about how to build sort of automated software tools that would help us integrate models. And actually, I'm just going to sort of document the process by which we came to this idea of prioritizing integration. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of criticism. Just to see if it means anything. There is a workshop on Thursday where we're going to this in a bit more depth if you're interested. So I'll probably very briefly or even skip the context slide, the need for integration. I think here I would probably be preaching to the choir. I will then just talk about two problems of integration that go on. One is to do with collaboration together, and the other is the sort of technical side to do with semantic interoperability, which can be the cause of some of these disputations and contestations in meanings and understandings in these wicked problems we're facing. And then we're going to sort of imagine this idea of prioritizing integration and try to think about what it might look like or what it might mean, and ask ourselves afterwards what software support we might need for that. And I think I'm not going to offer any answers to that last question. So as I said very briefly, environmental problems are wicked problems with no unique or obvious solution, and any intervention you do will have cascading consequences with a potentially political dimension. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so very interested in what Hannah just said, because you can very well imagine that the matrices she was talking about could well change even as a policy intervention took place, and people needed to adapt and change what they did. The classic kind of language certainly used in sort of the European Union around these kinds of problems is what's called the quadruple helix, and that largely means engagement from science, industry, policy and citizenry in a sort of iterative path where you're continually trying to adapt and adjust to the problem. This, if you like, was the culmination of the workshop. It was this sense of having been in several different projects with a Gantt chart that looked a bit like this on the slide. So what classically would happen is you have work package 1 is management, and you just sort of work your way through that. And then the rest of the project largely does sort of a bit of theoretical literature review and stuff, and then you go off and do some field work and perhaps what we might call proper science. That's just slightly, what's the word, satirical view. And then integration happens at the end. So we go away and we do our stuff, and then we integrate it all at the end. And well, we usually find ourselves in integration work packages as modelers, certainly as integrated modelers or agent-based modelers, where we're trying to sort of bring diverse knowledges together. And usually with various delays and issues and very fascinating findings in work packages 2, 3 and 4, work package 5 is usually left to sort of month 29 or month 30, or right at the end of the project, and is really gets pushed. And so we're very frustrated by this, and we even started a Facebook group called Work Package 5 is Doomed, with a view to kind of sharing stories, but it never really took off. And it seems that when we get together in these projects, often the proposals talk a lot about how much transdisciplinary and integration work they're going to do, but actually the priorities are other things besides integration. We might question whether it's right to put integration as the main priority, though this talk has the attitude of, let's at least explore that question. But these various things listed: software, science, the problem we're all working on, stakeholder value, impact, and successfully and smoothly managing and administering the project tend to be given more priority than integration. So shifting to the kind of technical side of the integration problem, we have semantic interoperability, and I see Alexei Voinov is in the session. I'm very much looking forward to his talk, and I'll embarrass him by saying that his paper with Shugart in environmental modeling software with the word integronsters in the title is one of my favorites. And essentially, this paper goes through a number of different ways in which, metaphorically speaking, integrating models can lead to all kinds of horrors. And one of the ones I've kind of abstracted on the right is the very famous optical illusion, where even with semantic annotation of the links between a two-pillar arch and a three-pillar arch, you end up with something impossible. And this can mean that from a modeling perspective, integration is seen as a technical rather than collaborative challenge, and something to be resolved with standards and metadata and API and ontologies. And of course, because we're all modeling geeks, technical is what we can do. But Gabriel Bammer has a really nice article in Nature Communications pointing out that integration needs to be recognized as a specialism. And that means that there's more to the story than software support. There is questions of infrastructure, culture, data, funding, and research needs that need to be understood. So, like I said, this is reporting on a workshop that took place in November 2019, and the participants are the list of co-authors. They had a mix of expertise in agent-based modeling and in semantic knowledge and model integration. And the aim really was at advancing modularity, reuse, and integration in agent-based modeling of social ecological systems. So we didn't have the aim of coming up with this kind of integration first attitude. The exercises we did were something called a culture map, and this is where you look at behaviors and that's what you actually do, the outcomes that those behaviors lead to, and what enables or blocks those behaviors from happening, around the question of what happens when we integrate knowledge in models. We also, various of us, had tools that we had developed that we thought might address some of the problems that the culture mapping was going to elicit. And we did a SWOT analysis of those with respect to the enablers and blockers. We then did a stakeholder analysis. We just thought about who might be, who are the people who might affect the success of integration, and moved on to a storyboard of ideal model construction use cases. So we tried to imagine our tools being used in a project where wicked problems were being addressed. And then we backcasted how the story happens. So, well, as we look at, now I'm not really expecting you to be able to read all the small text on this slide, but you might be able to. So this looked at some of the enablers of behaviors we identified in the culture mapping, and there were things like having accessible data, and thinking in advance about how others might use your data when you collect it or generate it using a model. A particular agent-based modeling software tool called NetLogo, which is really designed to teach children how to program, but actually turns out to be quite useful for developing agent-based models quickly. These questions, these enablers, and there are more enablers on the other side: open data, open modeling, job security, and things like that. You can ask yourself, how many of these enablers are supported by a model software integration tool. So you imagine you have some magic application on your desktop. How many of these things that we were thinking about were really supported by them? And it's a rhetorical question. And again, you can do a similar exercise with the blockers. So there are, the problem wickedness. You can have too much data to work with. There are scientific knowledge lags as you're asking questions of other disciplines they don't really know how to answer. You might have arrogant colleagues who just write papers for their own home discipline and do nothing to help you with integrating their knowledge into the rest of the project. And you've got time and resource limitations and so forth. And the other thing, again, is if you have a magic piece of software on your desktop, these blockers are not going to be solved. As we looked at a stakeholder analysis, these were sort of users of integrated, we looked at a stakeholder analysis of people who might be interested in the work of a project in which such a tool might be used, where you're trying to address all the different problem wickedness. And the point is that users of integrated modeling toolkits, scientists, the people who develop tools, people working on the modeling, perhaps policy analysis, they are primarily subjects in the language of stakeholder analysis, in that although they're very interested in these things, they have rather low power over the sort of story of the model or its use and its use of integrated modeling software. And the key thing is that the people with high power, the players and context setters, who could be people like your line manager or grant reviewers, or people who work in scientific computing or funding agencies, they are rather less interested in what's going on.
3 minutes, Gary.
Yeah, good. So the storyboarding and backcasting, we started to imagine a scenario using the integrated modeling tool, and backcasting is just thinking about what you might need to do to achieve some particular vision, in this case the scenario we'd storyboarded, and try to put almost dates on them. And they identified things like outreach, publication training, incentivizing contributions from third parties, funding, data management, best practice, and even having legal liabilities for modelers and their recommendations. But the point is, these are all primarily social and institutional things, not things that can be facilitated by software tools. So then you ask, well, what would projects look like if knowledge integration was the first priority? We can ask questions like, what would the outcomes be? Would we get good science as a result just from focusing on integration, or happy stakers, or the problem that we were looking at solved in any great sense? Though, of course, wicked problems can't be solved. Though, of course, it needn't all be good. Is there a risk of baking in an integrated view early, thereby stifling emerging perspectives as the project progresses? Is there a risk of groupthink? And if integration is focused on everybody having the same view at the end of the project, then I think, certainly from what Hannah was presenting just now, I would argue probably something's gone a bit wrong. And how would it affect project workflow and management? Again, underpinning all that is some institutional changes that might well need to take place, not least around the kind of managerialist culture that can happen in academia, and around some of these projects with transdisciplinary ambitions from the point of view of the funder. where you have this thing called tick box. And there's a lovely book by Boyle in 2020, where he coins the term talk box, the opposite of tick box, on the basis of Goodhart's law, which essentially says that as soon as people try to achieve, or as measures of success become a target, then the measure is no longer useful. And this may mean rethinking funding, because you can imagine things you're trying to achieve, measurable things you're trying to achieve, like outputs and papers and things like this, might not be delivered. And so this then asks questions about what software requirements emerge from that perspective, what the focus of these tools should be. So it might not just be about modelers, but we need to help support other project participants to integrate knowledge so that we can put these things together.
Last slide, Gary.
Yeah, super. This is it. So knowledge integration of computer models built as part of transdisciplinary projects aiming to solve wicked problems. So then got these various questions over trust, transparency, and openness that you would hope maybe we could address with software, but they're not primarily technical problems because they have to do with people's trust. So I'll just end there on the workshop, and that's me done. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. That's you've got a few claps, but you might not be able to see them, and that was me clapping. Thank you for a look, really thoughtful. That's what I love about this conference, isn't it? You know, there's just this absolute diversity of ideas and styles of presentation. Some deeply technical, some really, you know, I don't know, cerebral, maybe you might call it. I don't have any questions that have come through. There is one saying that looking forward to the workshop. Are there any questions from people to Gary? He's bringing all of this stuff from session C0, so this is our look into C0.
Yeah,
Stephen says he has a comment. Is that you, Stephen?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, Stephen first and then Peter, correct?
Yeah, so my experience in the UK, working with UK water industry, has been that it's kind of like a paradox where, like you say, it's not a technical solution, but without that technical solution, a lot of the decision makers won't, like without having a technical tool or some kind of advancements technically, things kind of get stuck in the Stone Age. So what we've seen with the UK water industry particularly is that we kind of taken a top-down approach where we've created a really simple data analysis tool. Well, when I say really simple, it's basically like you send an email to the decision makers and they get a plot, and that's all there is, just a plot. But the idea is that you get all of these decision makers, and we've done this with decision makers for the last planning cycle in the UK, where they all got into a room, they all discussed this plot and all the trade-off kind of, part of kind of developing a water plan. And that worked really well because it was really, really simple. And what kind of tended to happen then, the conversations we had time with them for more and more information, asking for more details. And that's where, the kind of my work started to come in, where they wanted to see the actual time series or the actual flows, et cetera, et cetera. So while you say it's not a technical solution, what, that approach that we've taken is give them something really simple that they start some in the actual decision makers, and then you can work your way down where those decision makers can actually influence and say, we need to start using these tools, and that can work its way down, and then the technical aspect of it can then come in. So
Thank you, Stephen.
I've seen that work, and that's one approach.
Thank you. Look, we're on time now. We do have two extra questions. If people are happy to hang around for another few minutes, we've got a question from Peter, which is about, Gary, did you consider a design thinking approach, which probably could take all day to answer. There's another one from Olivia saying, in his experience, stakeholder first would lead to integration. And then there's a question about Goddard's law. So we're not going to get through all that in, 30 seconds. So look, Gary, if you're happy to hang around for a few more minutes, those
Yeah, no
people that
problem.
want to, thank you. Those people that want to stay, just unmute yourselves and have that conversation. For others, if we now have a 40-minute break, which is, you know, I certainly need it after listening to and trying to absorb 6 papers. And then we're back again at 10:40 a.m. Brussels time with Alexi for another set of 6 papers. So I'd like to thank everybody. We've had up to, I think, 51 people come and join us at different times in this session. So I'm pleased that it's a topic of interest to people. So thank you very much, everybody. If you leave now, I don't think anybody will be hurt. But Gary is unmuted. Peter, you're unmuted. So if you could ask your question. Thank you.
Hey, Gary. Yeah, thank you for that. It was really interesting, and yeah, look, you know, it's such a very real problem that we see all the time. And yeah, so I'm doing a project a little bit like it, and I'm trying to sort of use a design thinking approach and go to the decision makers who are going to, you know, so it's a decision support tool we're trying to work towards. You know, what do you need, and try and sort of start there and work back. I just wondered whether that was something you considered.
No, I'll be completely open with you. I'd not heard of design thinking, and when I saw your question, I thought, well, during the break, I'll go and Google it. I think the main point of the talk was, I think a lot of us there maybe. I think it would be correct to say we're all academics, though Matt Hare had done a lot of work in consultancy, and so forth. So he's got a lot of experience in industry. I think the focus for us has often been on trying to do these, you know, fun bits of computing science where we're trying to automatically integrate diverse knowledges that are potentially conflicting. And what was ironic, I think, was having got a bunch of geeks together in a room and talking about, you know, well, how should we move this area forward? What should we do? What we really came out with were the cultural problems. So to go back to what Stephen was saying a little, you know, it's not that technical fixes aren't part of the story. I actually think what we need to do is zoom out a little and start to look at the social and cultural milieu in which we're operating, you know, where there are demands on academics, there are demands on stakeholders, there are demands on industry, and these don't necessarily align, and that expecting a piece of software to help integrate diverse knowledges, you know, for all that may be wonderful, isn't necessarily going to address the real problems that lead to what we might call this work package 5 phenomenon, where you end up with integrating the knowledge at the end. It's not really given priority.
Yep, thank you, Gary. I notice also Joseph has let us know that there's actually a plenary on through the chat at the moment. If people want to head off to that, of course, you're more than welcome to do that. That's actually a very good thing to do. There are a couple more questions for you, Gary. I'm not quite sure what the protocol is around it. I don't think I should keep this session going any longer unless people want to hang out. I'm keeping the recording going, but people, you need to give me some indication of whether you're happy to stay. The next 2 questions are from Olivier about stakeholder first, and it's not fair putting Gary on the spot for all of these. These need to be discussions. And then the final one is from Kate about a question about Gotthart's law. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. How do you trade that off against measures becoming the target?
I think this is the myth of management. To be honest, so I can certainly answer that one. Olivier's question I'm just going to duck because, like you say, that's a long debate. But I think Kate's question is very good. I am getting a little bit skeptical that management and measurement necessarily go together. I think there are so many things we could measure. that if you try to motivate people by the measurement you make of them, or even try to motivate addressing problems by measuring targets, you end up with an awful lot. You're much more likely to end up with unintended consequences. So I suppose there's sort of a qualitative or human side to the measurement angle that needs to be addressed as well. So I would kind of put the integration first question right back to you. In a way, you could imagine your measures, your portfolio of measures and your key performance indicators and your big dashboard as essentially being like these big integrated models that are, you know, automatically exchanging data with each other, and that same problem then takes place, that you've kind of given a technical solution to something that may actually be cultural. So the reason why you're not succeeding isn't to do with a problem with anybody's motivation. There are deeper issues than what you're measuring at the heart of it. I'm not saying measurement's wrong. I don't, you know, it's certainly not. But I think it's a small part of the story, and the problem is focusing on the measures rather than on the bigger cultural picture that's going on. That's probably what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. Look, I am formally closing the session. I'd like to somehow thank you, you know, clap, clap, clap. Thank you, all of our speakers. Yeah. It's really been a great session. I think all of those that want to stay and have a bit of a chat, just do so. And we certainly need to line up for Tira and Hannah to have a conversation. I don't know how to set up a separate chat room. I don't think that's possible. But Gary, you don't need to now, you know, be having to answer all the questions. Exactly. I need a few other things, but okay. To my other co-conveners, to Kate and Tira, are you okay now to close the session off?